Now, we've got to talk a little bit about the patient journey. And I know patient journey is sometimes a term that people don't like, and I kind of get that. But I think the risk is when we're gathering these insights, we think about, well, there's diagnosis and treatment, what are they being treated with? But actually, the patient journey, the patient experience is so much more than that, isn't it?
The patient journey is so much more than that. We like to kind of put it into pieces because it's easier to handle. But at the end of the day, every patient in their own environment has a different journey, even with the same disease. It's the point you made earlier when you talk about that you can't just simply talk to a patient who may be an expert in their disease and expect that to be everybody's story. It's all helpful and it's all part of how we learn. But everyone's journey is different. Their environment, their socioeconomic status, where they're located with regard to healthcare, the support structure that they have around them. It's really an amazing thing to really take time to learn about that experience of a patient. I spent 14 years or 13 years in the exam room treating patients, and I'm still amazed when I sit in on a patient interview because you learn something every time. So yes, in industry and in most instances, we look at snapshots of a journey, but a journey in somebody who has a chronic illness is truly different stages and phases for them. And each of those things are different, and we need to respect that.
Yeah, and I think if you have that full picture, then you can stand back as a pharmaceutical company and say, well, this is where we should try and do something. Actually, there are certain elements that we probably shouldn't try and get involved in because it's not our strength.
That's exactly right. Understanding the long journey of the various patients helps us to understand what entry points exist for opportunities. How can we help and what can't we do that's not going to be reasonable? And most importantly, part of this idea of understanding the patient in their environment is what other symptoms exist beyond the disease? How are we going to address the idea that the patient may have a molecule or a medicine eventually to treat the disease, but they still have fatigue or anxiety or depression? All of those things, insomnia, those things are just as impactful on quality of life. And we need to be aware of it if we're going to provide a broad approach to patient need.
Yeah. Now, I've got to ask you, in my sort of mind, I think about the medicines making side, which is patient input into R&D, and the medicines taking side, which obviously once you've got something out there on the market, how you support that. Do they have equal importance to you? Do you tend to focus equal time and effort on insights in both those areas?
Yeah, I think you have to. I've sort of altered internally this patient-focused medicine development language to PFMDD, patient-focused medicine development and delivery. Because if you don't, patient centricity doesn't concentrate on the delivery piece, we're missing a huge portion of what patients are going to need. Even if you come to market with a new treatment, the delivery piece is critical. That's where behavioral understanding comes into play. That's where interaction with health systems comes into play. So yeah, we definitely need to make sure the science aligns with need, and in the exam room will solve a problem. Yeah. But if the patient can't access that medicine, or if we don't understand the other barriers that exist in their real world setting, then we haven't finished the job.
Yeah, absolutely. And different timescales to potentially make an impact as well.
Exactly.
Let's talk a bit about engagement. We've already touched on this in terms of, getting everybody to understand, getting everybody to understand what's going on in Patient Centricity Month. Tell me a bit more about some of the specific things you're doing at Astellas around engagement and some of the things you're doing that you think are a little bit different to other companies.
Well, one of the things with just patient engagement in general is understanding that you can't limit it to your comfort zone in a particular location. That's the first thing, right? That you have to have an experienced team that is able to have a global outreach so that you can be in new geographies and understand those patients where they exist in their real world setting. Another important piece is that you understand the legal and compliant rules and regulations so that you do this in a consistent way. One of the things I focused on since coming to Astellas is that these teams are specialized. They're not sort of wearing two hats where and one day there are communications and the next day they're engaging patients. We try as best we can to, whenever possible, to consolidate patient engagement into a singular activity and support the organization in that way. The other thing I think that's really important is that we, as an organization, the engagement teams listen to everybody's needs inside of the company, so that they understand that the researchers need certain types of information, yet the development teams need different types of information. And then we're talking about delivery. It's again different layers of understanding. So these teams have to be specialized with a keen understanding of the development process and the needs within the organization.
Yeah, and then sharing that information is a whole nother challenge, isn't it?
Right. Yeah, it is a huge challenge to make sure that not only the transfer of the information is done appropriately, but the reception of the information is done appropriately, because it's how the information is ultimately used. I tell the teams all the time, it's great. Let's capture all of this information. Let's do it the right way. Let's create repositories so the information is protected and we can continue to use this information and build on it. But if it's not being used in decision making, I'm not sure we finished the job.
Yeah, exactly. So we have these wonderful sort of code names or acronyms in pharma. Tell me about Saber.
The Saber Award is a fairly prestigious global award in public relations. But the thing that's interesting to me is that it's not limited to healthcare. It's any company in different categories can be nominated. And we were nominated for our Patient-Centricity Month 2021. And I couldn't be more proud of the team. I mean, Patient-Centricity Month is a unique offering inside of any pharma company. It's an extensive body of information for 4 weeks, the entire month of June, where we hear from patients, we hear from company leaders, we hear about processes that exist within the company. Well, 2021 Patient-Centricity Month was nominated for a Saber Award, and I'll tell you, we didn't ultimately win, but some of the finalists, two of the finalists, I think, were Volvo and I think Visa. So pretty good company. So I'm very proud of the team. It's quite an honor.
Yeah, that's a great achievement. I know you don't do these things to win awards individually or as a team, but it's nice to get that recognition. And I know closer to home, Communicate also recognized the work that you've been doing, haven't they?
It's exactly right. That's the second organization that is nominated, that has named Patient-Centricity Month 2021 as a finalist. So again, it is definitely not the reason. It's just sort of the reward, unexpected reward that might be out there, because at the end, it's really about the patient's award or no award. We have a saying inside of a tagline inside of Astellas that says, "Patients are why we hear you, and patients are why we do what we do." And if we can get the recognition, great. But either way, we're going at this full force to create solutions.
Yeah, no, it's great to get that external recognition. And I've got to ask you, how do other healthcare stakeholders, I'm thinking here like healthcare professionals or payers, how do they react to what you're doing with this patient-centric approach?
I think the reaction has been very positive, especially in those organizations or those individuals where we've interacted directly, because the first thing we have to overcome is something, again, you wrote about, and that is saying what we're doing is not enough, because people have heard it for the last few years and they sort of just assume, everybody's saying they're doing it. So once we interact with these folks and talk about specifically what we're doing, how we're using the information, what our goals are, and the breadth of what we're doing, both culturally and then from discovery through delivery, the feedback has been very, very positive. And in fact, I've gotten inquiries from other organizations, to say, well, tell us more about what you're doing, because I think it's really it's an important more important piece. And as you and I have talked about, this is a pre-competitive space, right? We talk about what we do all the time. I was on one of your your organization's podcast talking about the work that we're doing. So I'm happy to share whatever we're doing, and I'm even happier to listen to what other people are doing.
Yeah, I mean, again, for me, it comes back to constantly learning and avoiding seeing patient centricity as well. We've ticked that box and we understand that term. It's just evolving all the time, isn't it?
It really is. It's really evolving, and I think the work that you do, the work that I do, the work that others in this space do, and most importantly, these conversations are what going to promote the future.
Exactly. Well, speaking of the future, let's take a look to the future, both in terms of patient centricity and Astellas. Anything you can share with me around exciting plans over the coming year or beyond?
Well, I think we're going to do a lot more work internally. I think you and I will be talking about this as we move forward about what are we doing to encourage every single person from the time they apply for a role and the time the job is posted and until they're integrated fully into their work, their one-on-one meetings with their managers, their objective setting, all of those things are going to have a patient-centric integration over time.
Yeah.
We have an incredibly important shared objective this year with human resources. And it is extensively looking at how can we be sure that that happens. I think you're going to see a lot more of these programs that are going to promote a global approach to understanding the patient. And I hope you see a very clear, sustainable integration of the patient perspective in each of the areas we talked about: discovery, late research, development, and delivery.
That's great to hear. And I love that term integration because, again, too often it can be seen as a bit of a ticking the box exercise, or it's specialized functions, or you've got lovely websites out there talking about what you're doing. But actually, when you look inside a company to see whether it's mentioned in job descriptions, objectives, how much the patient comes up in meetings, that for me really is a true sense of how patient-centric a company is.
For sure. I think it's one of the most critical. When I started in August of 2019, one of the things I was thinking about at that time and raised is how are we going to change the dynamic visually for people so that they know that when they join here, they've joined the company that is really focused in on the patient. One other thing that I think both you and I will be working on as time progresses is this idea of measurement. I think measurement is going to be critical. We have to show that it matters to portfolio decision making. We have to show that it matters to the business, and we have to be able to quantitatively identify the benefits to the business. And I think we're all working on that, and I think we're on a great path forward to be able to do that. But that's a critical piece to sustainability.
Yeah, which is really tricky, isn't it? Because people like to talk about ROI, and it's very difficult to say we've done this with patients, so we've sold X more drug here, and that's not really why you're doing it. It's about return on engagement and being smarter. But I think, again, we're all learning about what the right way is to measure that, aren't we?
Yeah, I think there's qualitative and quantitative assessments, right? And in pharma, because we're such a scientifically driven biostatistical enterprise, we only look heavily at quantitative, but most of us every day we're making decisions qualitatively. When I take an umbrella outside of the house, I'm not using mathematical formulas to decide whether or not I think it's worth it, right? You look outside, it looks a little cloudy. These are qualitative decisions we make hundreds of times a day. And we can't discount the qualitative impact of patient centricity. Have researchers been more informed? Have they been able to make better decisions? Have their decisions been consistent with what they find to be true later on? And then there is the quantitative piece. And I think we can, as people focused on this in industry, come up with quantitative measures that matter. Are we creating capabilities that no longer need, or that are more consistent,
right,
in providing this information? Can we measure the differences between before and after these capabilities existed with regard to portfolio success rates and what gets into clinical development and how those development processes are better informed with patient insights and reported outcomes, and whether regulators, because we believe, right, regulators are going to ask for this for sure, right?
Yeah.
They're going to be saying, well, how did you decide on this patient population? What are the goals of your treatment? Well, you better have a pretty robust patient centricity function if you're going to be able to deliver on those expectations.
Yeah. And that gets me thinking as we look further ahead around how this really patient-centric approach could actually change some of the fundamental processes in our industry. So, as you know, at the moment, we're really trying to fit patient input into the R&D process, into the commercialization process. But play that forward 10 or 20 years, do you think this patient-centric approach could radically change the R&D and commercialization process?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's the whole reason we're doing what we're doing, is that this isn't a one-off sort of benefit that today we're doing and tomorrow is not going to be, no one's going to be paying attention to it. I truly believe that if you have these capabilities and you use them consistently in decision making, the portfolios will be stronger, starting in discovery, into research, and into development. While we're still going to have in industry, because of the work we do, high failure rates, what is actually entering development will have a more robust connection to patient need, so that what survives development will have an application in the real world. That's going to be the key. It's fewer shots on goal, but the shots that we take are going to have much more informed indications.
Yeah. And to do that properly, as you know, and as we've touched on, we've got to move step in step with the kind of regulators, the reimbursement bodies. So how do you see that evolving? Because we need to try and get to a point, I feel, where you're bridging what a patient views as a good outcome with a doctor, with a payer, with a pharma company. They're not always coming from the same viewpoint to begin with, are they?
No, they're not. But I look at it from, from the perspective, as you just pointed out, of payers and regulators. If I can provide a strong rationale as to why does this science make sense in this population at this entry point? And here's what we've heard as gaps in care. Here's what we know standard of care can do. This is a very strong starting point for them to understand why we pursued this indication. And remember, I see this as a parallel process with frequent touch points, right? As you're developing the molecule, you're also creating an understanding of the patient, and you're constantly infusing it into decision making in the program. Well, when we have this dossier ready to go to a regulator or make the argument to a payer, and you start to talk about this robust patient information, and you have a really clear idea of why it's going to be a benefit, boy, that's a long way versus us just having an opinion without that input.
Yeah, and it requires constant dialogue as well with the regulators, reimbursement authorities. Everybody's learning together on this.
Exactly. And they're still learning, right? They're not sure what to do with patient insights yet.
Yeah.
They're trying to figure out what to do on their end with it. They're trying to figure out what to do with their, when they say they expect it, what does it mean? How does it impact their decision making? But we need to be in this together, and we need to present to them ways that we believe it's impactful, not just wait for them to tell us, because we need to influence their thinking as well.
Yeah, agree. And one topic linked to that that's really come onto my agenda recently, and I'm fascinated by, is the idea of health equality or health inequality. So this is moving away from the school of thought of, well, we just want quicker trials, for example, to having more diverse patient populations in trials, as one example. Mm-hmm. So tell me a bit about how the patient-centric approach can help shift the needle in the right direction there.
Yeah, I think it's a key partner in this. Certainly development teams and operations teams have to be part of this, because as you pointed out, we all want more diverse clinical trials, but that doesn't happen just by saying we want to recruit more diverse populations. You have to create trial sites in areas where diverse populations exist. That costs a lot of money. It takes a lot of time, but it's absolutely necessary over the next 5 or 10 years, so that we have the ability to recruit these patients in different areas, and have clinical trial sites that are ready to go. But where does patient centricity fit in? Who better to help create that dialogue between that community and the organization? Who better to start the communication with the patient populations in those areas than the patient centricity functions, who are full-time working on this? So as we prepare these areas and geographies with an understanding of the needs of the patients in those areas, and the development and operations teams start to identify trial sites, only then will it come together and you can execute, right? But without those both activities, it's a process that's going to be tough to overcome. I mean, don't you think?
I completely agree. It's still in the very early days, but again, it comes back to everybody's learning, and we've got to keep pushing around what are the real issues and how we can address them and try and keep learning together.
And think of the complexity in the different areas of the world. You know, it's complex enough to do it just in the United States, but you know, where you're located, whole different set of barriers, but still has to be addressed as we start to think about diverse populations.
Yeah. And I wanted to sort of end this discussion. We could keep talking for hours and hours, I'm sure, but I wanted to kind of end this discussion with, if you could capture from the essence of our discussion today, key bits of advice for anybody watching this who's thinking, I want to be more patient-centric in my work. What are the key bits of advice you'd give to them?
Well, the first piece of advice would be, do not accept anything less than what will be impactful. Too often, 10 years ago, we whatever somebody would give us to work with. And my position now is understand what your organization needs to create a patient-centric process, and don't accept anything less than what will be impactful for patients. The next thing is make sure that as you start to think about what it is going to look like, think about what the needs are internally, and infrastructure is going to be the key. It is not enough to hire 7 or 10 people to just engage patients, because while that is an important first step, it doesn't finish the job. That information has to be integrated into the decision making throughout the life cycle of development. So I would say think long and hard, do it incrementally. You don't have to finish the job all at once, but start thinking about what does it look like when it's finished, and how do we start this process, never giving up on what's necessary to deliver on the promise. And I can tell you that, I've said this from the beginning, that the one thing patients can be sure of if they're working with Astellas, and that is they are not wasting their time. I guarantee them that if their information is being shared, we are utilizing it. We are pushing it into the decision trees, and people who are developing molecules are listening to it, and it's in their decision framework. And I think most everybody should be thinking along those lines. How do we make it impactful?
Yeah, I think that's a really powerful and compelling message to finish on. So, look, it's always great to catch up. I wish you every success with Global Patient Centricity Month this year. I know for you and the teams at Astellas that patient centricity is 24/7, 365 days a year. It's not just about 1 month, but it's a great way of raising visibility. And I hope people listening to this, it gets them thinking, and they can help learn along with us as we continue this journey. Great to catch up, Anthony. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Paul. It's great that I always appreciate your partnership, in these conversations that we have outside of this are always interesting and fun. So thanks so much.